Notebook. I'm your host, Frank Seravalli, and we're streaming live on the BR app as well as on YouTube. It is Tuesday, December 30th, 2025, our last show of 2025, and it's a busy time in the hockey world. Not only did we see a trade go down on Monday just out of the holiday roster freeze, but Olympic rosters are also due to be submitted on Wednesday. So lots happening in the hockey world. And let's dive in and talk about Monday's trade just to start. We had the Columbus Blue Jackets sending Yegor Shinnikov to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for a second round pick as well as a third rounder in 2027. And look, this is a position where I know that a lot of people have given the Pittsburgh Penguins slack on social media saying, wow, you gave up a lot for a guy that was readily available for the last number of months. But I think hockey fans have really overvalued draft picks, particularly second and third round picks. Just statistically, looking at the numbers, it's a 50-50 bet to have a second round pick play games in the NHL. To becoming meaningful impact player, obviously the odds are way lower than that, some approaching single-digit percentages. And so for the Pittsburgh Penguins to add Shinnikov, a 16-goal scorer a couple years ago in just 53 games, maybe you throw him on a line with Evgeny Malkin, a fellow Russian, and you allow a guy who still fits the Pittsburgh Penguins' age scheme to join your group and see if he can take off and find his game, become a 25, 30-goal scorer. I think that's well within the realm of possibility and a solid bet for a Pittsburgh Penguins team that, well, if you think about their draft board, they're dealing from a position of strength with all those picks that they have in their arsenal. These are picks well spent. And if you think about it from the Columbus Blue Jackets perspective, well, they just traded a second and a fourth for Mason Marchment. They get back a second and a third for Yegor Shinnikov. They end up with the better player, Marchment over Shinnikov, and they basically have a net difference of 0 picks. So interesting spot to be in. Let's take a quick peek at our chat. We've got Nathan Weber was first up today. He says, Frank, any rumors on any Hawks getting traded at or before the deadline? And if so, who can you see getting traded and a possible return? Well, thanks to Nathan for the compliment as well. He said he loves my work. You can add him to the list of the few. I don't even know that my wife loves my work. No, I'm just kidding. Nonetheless, Nathan, thank you. When it comes to the Chicago Blackhawks, I think what you're seeing right now is an underline of how thin the roster is without Connor Bedard, without Frank Nazar. Where do you pick from or pull from? If anything, I could see the Hawks not deleting much outside of Connor Murphy potentially on the back end, but adding. And I'm not talking about a big significant splash, but if you could find a player or two could be a potential difference maker or find the right value, I could see the Hawks trying to bolster their lineup as opposed to going in the other direction and continuing to tear down. Nathan continues on and says, any chance you see Chicago taking a defenseman in the top 5? I'm actually in Chicago right now, ran into a Hawks executive at the game on Sunday against Pittsburgh. And he was saying, well, we can't wait to get to the World Juniors to see our players, which obviously Anton Frundell is having a monster tournament for Team Sweden. But they were saying, we can't wait to see what players may be available to us. And it's a fun tournament from that perspective as well, previewing the 2026 2026 NHL draft at these 2026 World Juniors. You've got not just Gavin McKenna as the consensus number 1 pick, who's coming off of a hat trick on Monday night against the Danes, but you've also got Keaton Verhoff, who made his tournament debut. Chase Reed on the American side has been a big eye-opener as potentially one of the best defensemen in this draft. And you've also got Ivar Stenberg from Team Sweden, who's trying to do a lot and show that he's worth that draft status as well. Can I see the Hawks taking a defenseman? I mean, they have a glutton of defense right now. I would say you try and pick the best available, but if anything, finding a center would be huge. Anton Frundell's playing the wing in this tournament. Is he a center? Is he a winger? I think he's got top 6 versatility, obviously high-end potential. I'm not entirely sold just yet that both Bedard and Nazar are centers, both of them. exclusively. So if you could find that bona fide center in the draft, that would be a big leg up as well. AA62174 says, any thoughts on Stamkos to Islanders rumors? Could the Isles dump Duclair in the deal to alleviate the $8 million per for the next 2 years? Maybe that's one way to do it, as opposed to having the Nashville Predators retain money. But the term on that Duclair deal is, certainly probably problematic. Well, the real interesting part is how much Stamkos has ramped up his game as he hit 599 career goals. He's been one of the most productive players in the league, and the way that he's transformed his game here in the last number of weeks, getting way more shots from the inner slot and being more productive around the net. That's not the typical usual Steven Stamkos that we see scoring goals. That's not how he's gotten to 599, but I wonder if there's a new wrinkle in his game that certainly has caught the eyebrow and interest of teams around the league. A guy that for the first 6 weeks of the season was an untradeable asset is now playing his way into, if the Nashville Predators, who by the way are 11-5 over their last 16 games, if they decide that they're going to be a seller at the deadline, and Stamkos decides on his own that he'd like to move on and have a chance to compete for a Stanley Cup again, well, then he's a guy who's played himself into that conversation. You mentioned the Islanders. I could see that as a fit for a team who could use some scoring depth. I could see the New Jersey Devils. I don't know how they'd make the money work, but I could see with the depth scoring issues that they've had being a fit. TBD on Steven Stamkos. I'm really curious. I know he loves playing in Nashville, but how much interest does he have to move on to potentially find a new home? James Gordon says, where do you see Blake Coleman landing, if he is moved, that is, and do you actually see anyone wanting to touch that Andrew Mangiapane contract with the Edmonton Oilers? I think there's a potential with Andrew Mangiapane to move on. The market is flooded for guys that play a scoring winger role. I don't know that the Oilers would have to retain money at this point, but what you can do is cross off any return. And for the Oilers, the point should be to try and move on from the contract and the fit. It hasn't worked to this point. Mangiapane's looking for more opportunity elsewhere. And the Oilers have been real open and honest with guys that have given them a chance. Hey, come here, play, see what it's like, see how the fit is. And then if it doesn't work out, we'll try and find a way to move you. Of course, they just did that with David Tomaszek, going back overseas and mutually agreeing to terminate his contract after they signed the leading scorer from the Swedish league to give him a run this season. And yeah, I'd assume that the same could be in order for Mangiapane. There were teams that were interested in him over the summer. He landed with Edmonton by choice. He wanted to go there and to find that fit. And yeah, the market isn't going to be incredibly strong on return. A touch obviously well lower than someone like Mason Marchment, who got a second and a fourth. But just from the Oilers' perspective, to be able to move on from the deal would be a win in and of itself. And to answer the first part of James Gordon's question, where do I see Blake Coleman landing? If they had, well, they do have cap space, but if they have the right assets, couldn't you dream up or envision a scenario in which the Dallas Stars acquire not just Blake Coleman and bring the Texas native home, but also Rasmus Anderson coming over in one deal? I don't know that they have the assets to pull it off, draft pick and future wise, that the Flames would be looking for to put together a deal of that magnitude. But what the Dallas Stars definitely do have is that cap space. They're waiting to make the final call on Tyler Seguin and that $9.85 million as he begins his rehab exercises. He had some fun Instagram posts coming off of that ACL injury, him standing there in the rehab room with his daughter, who was still on all fours, and he wrote the caption, "Who walks first, me or her?" So Tyler Seguin at least having some fun with his rehab process in what has been a tough year for him. All right, let's take a peek at our rundown here. Let me just zoom through our chat on the BR app as well. Ant says, Rangers, buyers or sellers? At this point, you'd have to think sellers, and Artemi Panarin on the move. But look, the Buffalo Sabres winning 9 games in a row and playing themselves into a playoff spot, a tie with the Florida Panthers. is an indication that any team can get hot this year and any team can make a run up the Eastern Conference standings. I know you guys are beyond me saying it, but I'm still not ready to declare the New York Rangers dead just yet. Speaking of timeline, let's talk about Matthew Tkachuk, and let's talk about his rehab and return from injury. He has rejoined the Florida Panthers for practice. He is wearing a non-contact yellow jersey. And everyone wants to know, will he be in the Florida Panthers lineup on Friday for the Winter Classic on January 2nd at Lone Depot Park in Little Havana in Miami? And the answer to that is TBD. I'm leaning toward no, shading toward no for a number of reasons. One, these are unusual ice conditions. And two, it's not just the Winter Classic that Matthew Tkachuk wants to come back and play in. He's got a bigger goal in mind, and that is the Olympics. And that's just 5 weeks away. Matthew Tkachuk, surely one of the Team USA selections, and in a spot where you work all the way back from a torn adductor surgery. You have 6 months of rehab. As exciting as it would be for him to play on Friday in the Winter Classic, I just don't know that that's the game in that environment to test it out. And so he's going to push. There's no doubt he wants to be part of the spectacle, which Paul Maurice was alluding to in his commentary on Monday after practice. But I'd say if you were to size up some odds, I'd say 70-30 that Tkachuk doesn't play. That's just my hunch based on my understanding of the situation. Some news on the PHPA front, and that's the Professional Hockey Players Association, which covers the AHL and ECHL. The two sides ratified an agreement on Tuesday, the league announcing just over an hour ago, that includes increased pay, better benefits, and increased time off and better travel situations and equipment for ECHL players. As their strike lasted just a few days, they'll be back on the ice, required to report to teams on Monday. They're going to play their games on Wednesday as part of a big New Year's Eve slate in the ECHL. Good to see them get taken care of and show their collective force and might to bargain for better working conditions. And it's been a tough grind and sled in the ECHL in terms of turning revenue over for owners. It's a totally different business model than, of course, the NHL or even the AHL. It's a very community-driven and based operation. And so not dealing with apples to apples, the asks had to be reasonable. They were able to find some common ground after the ECHL players flexed their muscle with the PHPA acting at their behest. And now they can settle in for a nice 5-year agreement with some labor peace and better conditions for all. So congrats to the ECHL players for ratifying their new agreement. Let's take a peek at our chat here. Happy Octopus wants to know, outside of the Sabres moving a goalie, any other Buffalo rumors? Well, I think one thing we can put to bed, Happy Octopus, with this 9-game winning streak is the job security for now for Coach Lindy Ruff, who, man, he deserves an era of good feelings and run with the Sabres. We were talking about the start of this season and Kevin Adams as their general manager being a dead man walking. He is ousted, replaced by Jarmo Kekalainen, and you're thinking, does the head coach follow him out the door? It was one of the first things we talked about is the Buffalo Sabres need to make a decision. Are we keeping Lindy Ruff or are we making a change? And this franchise icon who played with Buffalo, had such a great first tenure with the Sabres, was fired by owner Terry Pegula at some point early in Pegula's tenure. Now to have this second crack at it and have gone so poorly over these last 2 seasons to now be on the other end of it. What a moment for Lindy Ruff in the final year of his contract with the Sabres. Is he going to continue coaching? Age 66, to see him have this type of joy and fun again with this group, which has found some significant energy. The building is sold out in Buffalo. It has been fun to watch. I just couldn't be happier for Lindy Ruff to get that moment again in the sun and to feel good after what has been a very tough run in Buffalo. Any more moves from the Wild? Connor wants to know in our BR app chat. Yeah, I do think there are some additional moves on the horizon. A team that is settling in, and with the addition of Quinn Hughes, has been one of the very best teams in the league, really for the last couple months now. What stands out is the same to me as everyone else. Yurov has been an eye opener. He had made the Marco Rossi swap a lot easier. Joel Eriksson Ek is a horse, but the Minnesota Wild absolutely need to improve down the middle. The tough part is easier said than done. We've talked a number of times here on the BR app and the NHL Insider Notebook about how difficult it is to add a center, let alone an impact center. So the market is incredibly thin. The Wild have their work cut out for them. Can they still be competitive and compete with the wingers that they have? Matt Boldy is a superstar. Kirill Kaprizov is a superstar. Of course they can. To find some reinforcement down the middle is the name of the game for the Wild. And they've made a very clear statement here. They're not in it to just hang around. They want to compete and have a chance to win a Stanley Cup. It's not to finish in second place in your division to the Colorado Avalanche, who are on yet another winning streak, but it's to go out and chase the Stanley Cup, and to stop at nothing has been their mission and mandate, as indicated by the Quinn Hughes deal. So let's see what GM Bill Guerin has up his sleeve. Busy time for him with the Olympic roster selections due on Wednesday as Team USA GM. But on the backside of the Olympics, between then and the March 6th deadline, going to be a window for the Wild to continue to improve as that group of death in the Central Division, Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota. Man, it is going to be an absolute gauntlet trying to get out of that side of the bracket. The fact that one of those teams is guaranteed to be out after round one, it does not compute right now. Dylan Mack says, who could the Bruins trade at this point and what could they get? Well, another team that could use some more help down the middle. Who could they trade? I mean, I'm looking at the Bruins now, this team that has struggled a lot defensively. They've scored goals really well. Their power play has been excellent. A lot of people have pointed to Pavel Zacha as a trade chip. I think you need more Pavel Zacha, not less. And so I know that name has been connected. Maybe the guy that you try and move is Casey Middlestat. And the question would be, though, what can you find for him in terms of a value proposition? A half a point per game player so far this year, 8 goals. Last year he had 12, playing 15 minutes a night. He's a minus player. The physicality isn't there. You're not going to find a ton of value there. And so I think they've done a fine job with some of the bottom parts of their forward group in their lineup. I just think the Boston Bruins are in a spot where they need more heft up front. And how are they going to find that is the question. Maybe moving out Middlestat to get a better fit is a way to start, but you're going to have to attach to that in order to find something impactful. Jay Cooper says, what do the Red Wings need to do to preserve early success and end a playoff drought? Consistent goaltending would be a start, and they've gotten that because John Gibson has been one of the best goalies in the league in the month of December. That has helped them rise in the standings and stay toward the top of that Atlantic Division. The Tampa Bay Lightning having a thin edge in terms of points percentage. But I like what I've seen from the Red Wings. They compete. They work hard. It's been a meritocracy. Their young players have earned promotion and ice time. Some of their vets could use to contribute just a tad more. But will this be a year that Steve Yzerman makes a splash? Will he go out and spend to add to this group? Or do you look at the other side of the bracket in the Western Conference and say, we just talked about Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota. Maybe this isn't the year to add and load up? Or do you look at the rest of the East and say, Tampa's our chief competition for right now. Florida is knocking on the door once they get players back. Carolina has been consistent all year. where do we fit in that mix? Just making the playoffs is a great start for this Red Wing team that's struggled to do that and end that playoff drought that goes way back to Jeff Blashill and his coaching days with the Red Wings. But how do you get from, well, they're trying to go from non-playoff team to playoff team. Okay, that's one jump. The much harder jump is to go from playoff team to then being a team that's in that circle of contenders. And they've got a lot of work to do to get to that point. But for right now, the goaltending stabilizing with John Gibson in net has been a big positive. Happy Spider says, any buyers for Jeremy Swayman? I mean, why are you trying to move on from Swayman? 903 save percentage this year. And you might say, oh, that's okay. He did have a 910, 911 for a big chunk of this year. If you look at how porous the Boston Bruins are defensively, his 903 is really would be much, much better than that on a sound defensive team. His numbers, it's, you know how they say on your passenger side mirror, objects in mirror are closer than they appear. Well, in this case, the Boston Bruins and Jeremy Swayman's numbers are way better than they appear. Put him on any team outside of Boston, just about, and you're going to see those numbers rise in a big way. I think Swayman's had a mostly underrated season, and that's why I would have him for sure on the Team USA roster when it comes to the 2026 Olympics in Milan. Chip says, Leafs, buyers or sellers? This is an easy one, Chip. They've got to be sellers. Look at this team running into more injury issues toward the bottom of the NHL and Eastern Conference standings, showing really no cohesiveness to their game at any point, lack of consistency, lack of compete. And the big question when it comes to the Leafs being sellers is how deep does the cut go, and what can you move on from? Obviously, if you're going to be entertaining any sort of significant existential question, which I don't think they are right now, but when you get to the end of the season and you're asking yourself, how do the Leafs get back to being a contender? Do you have to ask the question about Austin Matthews, who has not performed well? I don't think they're there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but I also don't think that that conversation is incredibly far off in the distance as well. It's going to be picking up in terms of velocity and the force of those conversations the longer this malaise continues for the Maple Leafs. Polar Bear says, Islanders trade deadline, question mark. Well, we touched on Steven Stamkos. We touched on the New York Islanders potentially being able to use a jolt. The question is, with Matthew Darche being in his first year as general manager, he's got this sort of push and pull, right? They traded Noah Dobson over the summer, and you're thinking, okay, maybe this team takes one step back to take two steps forward moving on. But then Matthew Schaefer has come in and given this team an absolute shot in the arm. The Islanders players themselves have talked about his energy, how there's such a lightness and brightness that he brings to their team that he's changed their franchise. And so then the question is, well, how quickly do you spool up your timeline to then try and enable this team to compete around him? They've got the goalie in Sorokin, and yes, I know he's been banged up, but over the long haul, with a revelation like Schaefer in the lineup, it's hard not to be a believer in the New York Islanders and what they're putting together. So how big of a splash can they make? Can you do a little Seinfeld reference, Vandelay Industries, importer-exporter, where you're bringing some guys in and trading off some pieces that maybe aren't going to be with you for the long haul? Can you accomplish that at one deadline? Will you need to sell off now and then maybe add in the summer? Is maybe the better play? Can this team be a firm playoff team is another question, as we see the NHL standings begin to sift and sort out a little bit. It's incredibly jumbled, and they're right there squarely in the mix. And Schaefer has also kind of reached this spot where he has, cooled off a little bit. That's a spot where, does he hit a wall at some point during this rookie year? All right, let's take a peek at our chat here. King Spencer, what potential moves do you see the Panthers making before the trade deadline, if any? Well, the Panthers have yet to spend or yet to even commit to spending the Alexander Barkov LTIR money. So that's certainly one to keep in mind. Look, I would expect them at some point to do that. Bill Zito has been nothing but aggressive as Panthers general manager. And you could make the argument, hey, you've won 2 Stanley Cups in a row. No need to, throw good money after bad when it comes to assets for a team that may just not have it. A lot of things might be conspiring against them, from the Tkachuk injury to the Barkov injury to your defense is banged up. The Panthers have found a way to win without those guys, but then we've got more high leverage hockey on the way with the Olympics. So maybe this isn't their year. Or you could look at the other end of it and say, this is a team that knows how to win in the playoffs. No one in the Eastern Conference scares us. And we have use or lose cap space in a one-time, one-off situation. Barkov will be back next season, and we won't be able to spend that money. So can we add some rentals that improve our chances to win without significantly sacrificing future pieces, which they've already kind of dug and mortgaged a lot of that future already? There's no doubt that Bill Zito has something up his sleeve for the Florida Panthers. We'll see what that is. I'm excited to see what that is, given that cap space. All right. Should we talk about, since we talked about the Islanders, should we talk about Matthew Barzal and his fine? A lot of people didn't like the decision for Barzal with the slash, the whack at Mason Marchment. Look, I don't like any player using their stick and wielding their stick the way that Matt Barzal did, but heated moment in a game, I can understand how this comes as a fine. This wasn't to the head or to the face. There is padding and protection there. Not that that makes it right, but I could see why the Department of Player Safety landed on fine as opposed to a suspension for Matt Barzal. And as we turn the calendar to 2026, that begins trade deadline countdown season. Not necessarily to the March 6th trade deadline, but for me, once we flip into 2026 this week, it's really leading up to the NHL Olympic roster freeze, which kicks in at 3 p.m. on February 4th. Why is that important? Well, we talked about the condensed schedule and the Olympics and high leverage hockey. There's going to be a number of players who could potentially be on the move that will also be participating in the Olympics, that teams don't want the risk to shoulder the risk of a player going to the Olympics, getting hurt, and then having to pick up the pieces and being left holding the bag at the trade deadline. So I'd expect a flurry of significant trade deadline activity, trade deadline type activity leading up to February 4th at 3 p.m. Eastern time. I think it's entirely possible that we see a number of players move in that sweet spot in the weeks leading up to it, and that the trade deadline, the traditional trade deadline this year of March 6th, will be a little bit more quiet than usual, and just see the sort of typical rental players, probably guys that weren't participating in the Olympics, that could move, that you see teams rise and fall in the standings over these next few weeks to get to that March 6th date where everyone has sifted out their plan and figured out whether they're buying or selling. So just a timeline to keep an eye on in terms of February 4th, 3 p.m. That's going to be a day. We saw with the NHL holiday roster freeze on December 19th. It was an indication that this year is not your typical year in terms of deadline activity. Well, really appreciate everyone contributing to the chat today. Tons of great comments, questions, and conversation here on the NHL Insider chat on BR. It was great to hang with you all year long. And from our family to yours, wishing you all the best in happiness and health as we close out the 2025 calendar year and head into 2026. That'll do it for today's edition, and we'll talk to you soon.